Welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. In this episode, we'll be in conversation with members of the Multifaith Network for Climate Justice in Bellingham, a small city in the north of Washington state. We'll hear from Deb Cruz from the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship, Steve Hansen, a Buddhist from the Insight Meditation Society, and Andrea Shupack from Congregation Beth Israel. Rooted in a sense of spiritual and moral responsibility to protect the earth, the mission of the Multifaith Network for Climate Justice is to engage and connect different faith and wisdom traditions in responsive, collaborative community.
I think every faith has some traditions and teachings and values around care for the earth. And so coming to MNCJ and being able to share from all those traditions, we have so much to learn from each other. And we can inspire each other and come together in community to do this work where we're all inspired and coming from our own faith's call to us to be involved, and sharing that with each other is, I think, really meaningful.
Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. Well, welcome everyone to the podcast. Thanks in advance for being part of this conversation. Steve, Deb, Andrea, I'm going to ask you to tell us just a bit about your faith communities and to describe your connections to it. Let's start with you, Andrea.
I'm the cantorial soloist and education director for the Reformed Synagogue, Jewish Synagogue, Congregation Beth Israel. And we are basically the only organized synagogue in town, but there is also another smaller organization called Chabad that meets as well. But we pretty much cater to Jews of any denomination, even though we are affiliated Reform. We kind of have an eclectic amount of programming and services to try to accommodate all those different flavors that might be here in Bellingham.
And what do you do in particular with that community?
As the cantorial soloist, I lead services with Rabbi Joshua Samuels. So I do the music and singing for our prayer services, as well as other holiday, so Shabbat and holiday events like that. I also help with a lot of the programming that we do as a community in other ways. And as the education director, I run the Sunday school, which is preschool through high school.
Steve, how about you? Tell us a bit about your faith community.
Yeah, I've been a member of the Bellingham Insight Meditation Society for about 18 years now. We're a close-knit group of meditators here in Bellingham. We follow the Theravadan Buddhist style insight or Vipassana meditation. That's the style practiced in Southeast Asia, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia. We meet weekly for meditation and a program that follows based on those teachings, primarily in our tradition, although we also look at Zen teachings and from other traditions as well. We have weekend retreats a couple times a year and a longer retreat on Samish Island for about a week. We're lay-led, don't have a guiding teacher here, so it's mainly coming together and discussing among ourselves. We do have teachers visit us for the retreats and occasionally on the Tuesday night teaching.
Deb, how about you?
I'm with the Unitarian Universalists, which is a liberal, non-denominational faith community. We were rooted in the Christian Judeo traditions, but in 1961, we merged with the Universalists at that time. And now we are very much non-denominational. And you will find many different kinds of spiritual perspectives. Within the congregations, we'll have Buddhists, and you'll see Hindus, and you'll see pagans and Christians as well. I'm with the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship. I'm also president of Justice Washington, which is a UU state action network, which is kind of a misnomer because we work regionally and nationally as well, and not just within the state. With the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship, I work a lot with the social and environmental justice groups there, and with Justice Washington, with the other congregations throughout the state.
So I realize that no one has elected you to be the official spokespeople of your religious or your faith communities, but I wonder if you couldn't at least give your perspective about some of the main reasons that you think your faith community has associated with Multifaith Network for Climate Justice. Deb, can we start with you?
Environmental justice or the earth is a core part of Unitarian Universalism. We have 7 principles, and the 7th principle in particular calls for us to affirm and promote the respect for the interdependent web of existence, of all existence of which we are a part. And in addition to that, when we joined with the Universalists back in the 60s, we also added on a series of sources of living traditions that we draw from as part of our faith community. And one of those traditions calls out the spiritual teachings of the earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. So the earth and all of the intersecting relationships that we have with her are built right into and very much upfront and out in center of the kinds of things that we do and that we engage in. So MNCJ was a really good fit. In fact, we started out meeting at the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship till COVID hit, and we had to go to Zoom.
How about you, Andrea?
I think Judaism speaks very strongly about the need to care for the earth. And so our Social Action Committee definitely has recognized, in particular in the last couple of years, how much more we need to be doing as a community to learn about and take action to reduce climate change and care more for the environment. I was drawn personally to MNCJ on my own, but we have slowly been bringing more congregants from Beth Israel to come to the monthly meetings and to also then bring that back to our community. We actually, in the last, I think now we're in 5 months in, we even started our own, what we're calling an environmental chavara. Chavara just means like an informal group gathering where people come and just support each other in the work that they're doing and share in community how we can do more and what else we might want to inspire each other to take on. And I think all of these have sort of been happening together at the same time, more participation at MNCJ and starting this group, and then in our Social Action Committee, focusing more on these issues. The Social Action Committee is always choosing between what justice issues we might be choosing, and climate has definitely been taking a high priority in the last few years. So I think that has all come together with my own personal passions and interests, which drew me to start attending meetings on my own as well.
Steve, what about your faith community? Why do you think that they are drawn to the MNCJ?
Our core trainings are really personal development in 3 main areas. The first one is kindness, goodwill, and compassion. That's supposed to be generated for all beings, not just humans. And the second leg of that is ethical living, which again, there's a strong precept for not harming, and that is also directed to all beings. The third one is wisdom or insight that we get out of calm and concentration, and that's to kind of help us guide our efforts and our actions in a wholesome direction. And we've got some key teachers that have been very active and influential in the climate movement. One is Joanna Macy, who's been a deep ecologist since the 70s. And then Bhikkhu Bodhi is one of the main translators of Buddhist texts. And he gave a very moving talk to the United Nations in 2019 on climate change and the need to redirect ourselves from the industrial civilization that's destroying the planet.
Well, I'm interested in the stories that you can tell about your faith community's involvement with MNCJ, but I'm also interested in your personal stories to know what are some of the factors and influences that brought you where you are today. Could you, Andrea, talk to us about your relationship to creation and how that has developed over time?
Ever since I was a child, I remember really being concerned about where we were heading and speaking up at assemblies in school, even in elementary school. My Judaism has definitely informed that. Also, my time in nature growing up and just appreciating the natural world around me and all the gifts and amazing wonder and awe that come from that. But Judaism, a concept that has always really resonated with me, is this idea of B'Tselem Elohim. And that's something that I learned as a very young child that I've taken with me and matured my ideas around it. But B'Tselem Elohim means made in the image of God, and that everything in all of creation, down to the tiniest little blade of grass, has a spark of the divine in it and is made in the image of God. That's really drawn me and motivated me in the work that I do today, and trying to motivate others as well to care for our planet. That Judaism has taught that to me and carried me through, has really been an impactful piece in my own relationship with the earth.
How about your relationship, Deb? How has that developed over time?
My relationship and the start of my spirituality begins, again, like Andrea, as a youth, as a young child. My history, though, is a little bit darker, a little bit more tragic. As a child, I was bullied and had a lot of difficult challenges. And one of the means of, I guess, surviving that time period was my connection to the earth. It was through the earth and through my walks through the woods and through my forays on the lake shores and in those kinds of places where I was able to find safety. I was able to find healing. And that relationship has intensified over the years. I have come to learn to listen to her. And part of that development also came during that dark time. I was introduced to and became close with a Lakota Indian family, which further enhanced because they took me under wing and started teaching me a lot of the different perspectives and different thoughts and attitudes, regarding the earth. So that's followed me through. And the basis of my work right now and my involvement in environmental issues and things of that nature are as a repayment for what the earth has given me over time. The tremendous amount of grace, the tremendous amount of patience, and all of the other gifts that she puts forward that I see at this point in time are being neglected, disrespected, abused, unappreciated. And so my focus is basically to try to do what I can to return some of the healing that she's given me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Steve, what about your relationship to nature and how has that developed over time for you?
Well, mine also starts with my youth. My dad would take us camping and fishing in the Colorado mountains many times every summer. And it was beautiful. I know compared to what the Native Americans must have seen, it was already degraded. But for me, watching it over time since then has been quite painful as the highways made the mountains more accessible, more people moved in. I graduated high school in 1970 and the year of the first Earth Day, and I got very involved in environmentalism at the time. I was especially touched by the Paul Ehrlich's population bomb and the issue of overpopulation. Still see that as a key fundamental issue that isn't discussed nearly enough. I also began to read and see a few years later the way that Indigenous people lived and how they saw the earth, and the idea of the seventh generation considering your actions in terms of how that far out into the future. And at the same time, I was just starting to study Buddhist philosophy and saw that the idea of mindfulness and clear awareness of what's happening, what I'm doing right now, and what those effects are going to be really kind of dovetailed with that idea of considering actions into 7 generations in the future. And so that really carried me along.
Well, I'll put this next question to all of you and ask When you think about the various commitments of your faith communities, how would you describe the degree to which earth care or environmental advocacy are actually prioritized in the community?
I'll say that it isn't prioritized as much as I'd like. I've given that a considerable amount of thought because for me, it's such a core part of why I meditate, why I do most everything. But people often join a meditation group as a refuge. Many of our members are very committed and engaged in some way in social and environmental work. They kind of come to meditation as a way to recharge and rejuvenate. And so there's kind of a valid reason for them to kind of go into a shell. For some of us, these issues are very emotionally difficult. And in a way, there's a way of, I guess, spiritual bypass is the way they say it, of using it as a place to hide. So that there's kind of a fine line between using as a place to recharge and then re-engage and to go in and stay away from it. That may be true in many traditions as well. But there are an increasing number of teachers that are talking about turning toward it. Don't turn away from it, but turn toward the problem, see it, feel it. It's really a issue of grief and trauma in many ways, seeing the things that are being destroyed, the species that are being lost, and being able to face it and face the pain that's in that is really something that meditation can help spiritual communities in general.
I really think that in some ways you're correcting for some people a misunderstanding of meditation, because as you say, some people would assume that meditation is retreating and staying in that place of retreat. But you're talking about meditation as something that actually activates us and makes it possible for us to engage the needs of the world. And I really like the other thing you said, that it helps us to process the trauma of that engagement. When we're feeling the pain of environmental destruction, that meditation is a way for us to heal and be sustained in that work.
I really love that, Steve. One of the things that I am trying to do in prayer service is similar to what I think you're talking about with meditation. And I see them being, praying and singing and chanting very, very similar to meditation. And this idea that prayer is supposed to help us look in ourselves and inspire action, inspire us to do the work to be better. And I recently created a Shabbat morning service that addresses climate change and also appreciating the environment, to love and have awe and appreciation for the environment, to inspire then the action for care. And I hope to lead that service in our community in the near future. And so finding those moments, I think, are really key, because we are grieving, and it can be very difficult to feel like you can make a difference and you can have an impact and do something worthwhile. It feels often hopeless. And when we come at it from a place of hopelessness, that's when we often retreat and don't try to do something. And so what I would say our community is doing right now is starting to talk more, is starting to speak about that fear. And I've seen even congregants burst into tears trying to talk about what they're passing on to their children and how to grapple with these issues. And so I think we're coming to a place, I, like you, Steve, also, I hope we will do more. I want us to see us do more. But I think that what I'm seeing now is that we're really talking about it in a deeper way. And I think that is going to, in the future, really help us move into more meaningful and long-term action. So while I applaud what we have done so far with our education and our projects and things that we've taken on as a community, that's all wonderful. I'm really hopeful and excited about, and frankly, I think the pandemic helped us do this, because we retreated and now we're aching for connection, and we found this way to connect with each other and supporting each other through this difficult shifting in awareness. So I'm very optimistic that our community will be able to help each other lead the way and take on more and do more and be more outspoken about this, to me, the fundamental issue in the world today.
Deb, how about you?
Oh, well, I'm very fortunate because Unitarian Universalists have been long engaged in issues pertaining to the earth and around the earth. We have a number of national organizations. We have UU Ministry for Earth, which is very active in doing things. And Right now, they're going through their program, Spring for Change, which has a lot of earth emphasis and activities and events. We have our UU Service Committee, which works a lot with climate displacement and other climate-related issues. We have a Green Sanctuary program where many of our congregations go through a rather rigorous certification process to become a green sanctuary. A number of our congregations have environmental justice groups that are active, or we're active in other groups that intersect with environmental and climate issues, like our, First Nations and Indigenous peoples groups. A lot of those efforts are really focused on the environmental aspects in a way different than what the mainstream population engages with. We just last weekend just had a Rights of Nature summit. So we're delving into that. And this weekend on Saturday, we're going to be reviewing environmental legislation, both on a state level and on a federal level, to see where we're at and where we can go from here. There's a tremendous amount of activity going on, and it's all on different levels. You have those people who are engaged on an individual level, whether they're eating local, driving electric vehicles, using public transportation, and engaging in more sustainability issues on that level. Then we have the spiritual levels, where we do have public witness events and Earth Day ceremonies, and not just Earth Day ceremonies, but we have flower communions and we have water ceremonies and things that go into that. And then we have other folks who are engaged on the political level, which is the demonstrations and the legislative efforts and advocacy and things like that. So we come at it from all different aspects and hopefully make a place for each person to work with where they are and hopefully be able to help folks move into other arenas or other areas of environmental justice.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to say, Deb, that was really inspiring. And one of the things I hope being a part of MNCJ is that congregations who are leading the way like yours can help inspire those of us who are just kind of really getting into it on a wider, larger level now and could learn a lot from the work that you've already done as we try to do more as a community. I think that's a motivation I also have for being a part of MNCJ, is I hope to help our congregation learn and lead the way through the relationships we can build.
Well, we've also got Earth Ministry, which is another good interfaith resource to fall back on or to get in touch with, because they have very similar programs as well that crosses all denominational lines too.
Yes, and I know our Social Action Committee chair has been deeply in touch with them and has been bringing things to us through them as well. Yeah, thank you.
According to the Multifaith Network for Climate Action, it's important to learn from a diversity of perspectives and to stand together with those who are different from us in order to magnify the impact of our efforts to care for the earth. Of course, Earthkeepers stands with them in this conviction that we're always better together. In this spirit of collaborative learning, Earthkeepers invites all our listeners to tune in to a live video webcast conversation with author Brian McLaren on Tuesday, May 17th at 7 p.m. Pacific Time. I'll be hosting this event with Victoria Lures of the Wild Church Network and Kate Davis of the Center for Transforming Engagement at the Seattle School. We'll be talking to Brian about themes of creation care in his new book called Do I Stay a Christian? A Guide for the Doubters, the Disappointed, and the Disillusioned. Again, that's Tuesday, May 17th at 7 p.m. Pacific Time. For more information and to register for this free event, go to the Earthkeepers website at circlewood.online. Now, back to our conversation. So, the Earthkeepers podcast is guided by this idea that we're better together when it comes for caring for the planet. And by that, what we mean is that we really must seek to learn from difference, to learn what we don't know from other perspectives, other peoples, other cultures even. And that's part of the reason that we're talking together here on this subject. I'm wondering, What's one possible example or a way of thinking or being that the wider Multifaith Network community might learn from your tradition?
As far as what our Jewish faith can have to offer, we're right now in the year of the Shemitah, which is, and I actually got to introduce this idea to MNCJ at one of the events and teach a little bit about this concept. So in the Torah, there is a period of time every 7 years where the land is commanded to lay fallow, to not be cultivated. You can only harvest what grows naturally. You're supposed to let the land rest. Also, loans and debts are forgiven. So it's a social justice concept on all the levels for people and for the earth. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that's sort of in a nutshell. And we're in that Shemitah year right now. So it's been an exciting time to push us to go farther and be inspired by that. It's not practiced entirely to the letter of the law in the Torah these days. We have to kind of take our modern takes on how to implement the spirit of the idea. Since it only applies to agriculture in Israel, we use it as an inspiration for our work now more than the actual specific laws in the Torah that are laid out for the Shemitah year. But we're using that and Jewish organizations all over the world are using that as a time for really reflecting on and doing work on environmental and social justice. So that, I think, is a real beautiful lesson that the Torah and Judaism has to give for remembering. And it goes also to the seventh day, Shabbat, every week. That is also a time of rest. And the Shemitah is just sort of a larger version of that. And so Shabbat is a huge, huge aspect of Judaism that reminds us to take a day and be and appreciate and have gratitude and wonder, to be and not to do, and to stop being productive, to stop worrying about our money and our material goods, but to really be present, be with our family, spend time in nature. That is all part of the practice of keeping Shabbat and Shemitah. So I think those are wonderful. When practiced and really taken to heart, I think it's impossible not to foster gratitude for the environment in those moments of introspection on Shabbat and Shemitah.
Steve, what about you? What can we learn from your tradition?
This week we watched a Joanna Macy video. The theme of our night was helplessness. It was mainly around these issues. And what I mentioned before about being able to face the grief and stay with it is really a mindfulness practice that takes work and takes a lot of awareness. Joanna Macy was emphasizing both the pain of the situation, but also not to lose track of the gratitude and joy that can arise at the same time. It's a beautiful world, and we're alive in it. She always talks about how special it is to be alive at this time. I also wanted to mention that for me, the participation in MNCJ, I've gotten a lot out of some events we've had with our local Lummi people. And that's really thanks to this long and close relationship that Deb Cruz has with them. She's been able to bring them in, and we're getting some really valuable teachings from them. Their relationship with the land and the Salish Sea here is really an example of a better way. Counteracts the profit-driven consumption that happens elsewhere.
What about you, Deb?
Well, I think one of the big things right now is that people tend to think of our environmental issues as just environmental issues, that we think and we talk about the earth and we think and talk about climate change, but we really don't sometimes make a necessary connection to how those impact other communities and the intersectional relationship to the human communities, to the animal communities, to the plant communities, and all the rest of that. So the intersectionality part of it is really important, because when we start talking about climate change, we should be looking at how climate change actually impacts BIPOC communities or other marginalized communities. When we start talking about the migrant farm workers who are out in the berry fields picking in an extreme heat or extreme cold, or getting inundated, their work camps getting inundated by flooding, by looking at how the rising sea levels is putting at jeopardy a number of the tribal nations whose lands and communities are based on islands, and the impact that it's having on them. The impact of climate change that will be coming and has come to some extent on our orca population, for our southern resident orcas and some of our other natural species. So when we look at the environment, is to look at it and understand those relationships and how they're being harmed. And the list goes on, because you've got the low-income communities who are getting stuck being hosts, if you will, to industrial plants, and especially fossil fuel plants. And so there's an impact of cancer and asthma and all kinds of other issues just for those communities who have to live next to those types of facilities. So that would be one thing that I'd like to see. And even in our own congregations, because sometimes that doesn't always make the connection within our own congregations or groups, is that when you have, it's like Van Jones said during a Pachamama Alliance that we had one time. He goes, if you pull on an environmental issue or a thread, eventually you're going to come and the social justice issue is going to be woven into it, and vice versa. You pull on that social justice issue and eventually you're going to see that there's an environmental issue that's attached to it. So when we go through and start looking at things and we start looking at solutions and possible actions, that we look at it in a more holistic way and not just whether or not I'm recycling. So to take it that one step further.
I want to confess something. As I listen to you talk, I realize that I'm aware of that interconnectedness of all things, but I think on some level, there are times when I don't want to go there, because if I pull on that string, there are more and more strings to pull. And I find it very overwhelming, even to the point of feeling, what's the point of making the small efforts that I can make? And I'm wondering if any of you have faced that same tension where it just gets overwhelming when you actually acknowledge the connectedness of the issues.
Oh, yeah.
All of you.
Yeah. I definitely vacillate between hope and fear, and overwhelmness and empowered, like back and forth all the time.
Yep, that's a good way to put it, Andrea. Sometimes you feel like you're in a no-win situation, but you have to find a way to do what you can in the moment that you're in to the best of your ability, and hope that everybody else is doing the same, because then maybe we might get somewhere. But it is really difficult to keep your spirits up, to not get burnt out, to not get fried, and to stay hopeful and positive. And sometimes that's very, very, very difficult.
And having a community like MNCJ, or people that see the problems like you do, and you can come together and share the emotional side of this. That's really the part that's going to pull you away from it if you can't handle it.
Absolutely.
We can only do this in community. It is too overwhelming on our own. And I just wanted to share my favorite Jewish quote, Jewish teaching from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers, is Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It says, it is not incumbent upon us to finish the work, but we must do our part. It's self-explanatory, but that we all have something. None of us alone are going to solve this. It is too big and too overwhelming. But if we all do the piece that is inspiring to us, and I think that's the hopeful side of what you said, is that because everything is so interconnected, we all can find the piece we're most passionate about and tackle that piece, and it will have an impact on all these other ways as well, because of how much each string is, we're talking about that. Everything's so connected, so we can all find something that we're really excited to do the work on. I think I've been reading Catherine Hayhoe's book, and I think she really talks about that. You just have to be a breathing person on this earth to care about climate change, because it impacts every aspect of our lives.
That reminds me of the story of the hummingbird. The basic premise is I'm doing what I can, even though I am just a little bitty hummingbird. I'm doing what I can.
In a way, that mindset of doing what we can is freeing in some ways, right? I mean, it becomes less heavy when you realize you're responsible only for what you're responsible for. I love what you said, Andrea, that I think a big part of the indication of what we're responsible for, how we recognize those parts that we're to play, is the things that we can do well, the things that we even love to do. So that makes earth care and advocacy really an act of passion and expression of those things that are essential to our person, are unique to us. So I really love that perspective. You have all talked about MNCJ as teaching you things, as influencing your thinking. I would love to know more about why, the why of MNCJ. Why do people actually participate in it? What's it brought to you or to your community in terms of benefits?
I already mentioned one, which is Deb's bringing us into connection with the Lummi people here and their relationship with the land. That's a big one. And not every congregation is fully represented, but the key people there are very committed, and being able to have this community that we talked about needing, of people that care deeply and are very committed to acting. I think that's the main thing we're getting out of it. And getting it from different perspectives. I really love hearing Andrea talking about the Jewish perspective of it. And we've got several Christian congregations that have earth care as a key component of their involvement.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think every faith has some traditions and teachings and values around care for the earth. And so coming to MNCJ and being able to share from all those traditions, we have so much to learn from each other, and we can inspire each other and come together in community to do this work where we're all inspired and coming from our own faith's call to us to be involved, and sharing that with each other is, I think, really meaningful and really helpful in combating that sense of being alone in it or isolated or hopeless, that, we're hearing from different presenters and we're hearing from each other and what we're doing and all the different ways we can get involved and do different things, that it really does bring hope and the ability to keep going.
I can't really add much more than that, because I think what I've seen with MNCJ has been a gathering space and place for people within various traditions who want to take that one step further than where they are now, and to draw on and get ideas. And it's not just a matter of getting ideas, but it's also being exposed and realizing that, hey, these other traditions do in fact have something within their doctrines and their religious and spiritual structures that speaks to the earth. And it's a great opportunity to find that connection with each other and be able to, like we were talking before, to be able to give that support in what might sometimes be an isolated situation where your congregation doesn't really have quite an active group or isn't as active as you would like to be. But here is a place that you can learn more, you can grow more, you can contribute to that process as well, because everyone does.
Well, when you think about things that you have taken away from involvement with this group, it makes so much sense, right? There's a beauty to the wholeness of the perspective that comes out of such engagement. But the fact is that MNCJ is an outlier. You do not see this kind of multi-faith collaboration, cooperation, even community very much. And I'm wondering, what is it that would make people hesitate to become part of something like MNCJ?
There is a good deal of work that goes into it, and we've had some very committed leadership that has put a lot of effort into getting it started and getting it going. And I think that's a little bit unusual in our case.
To some extent, there's a couple of different things going on. Some folks might feel threatened to have their religious perspective or religious view or spiritual practices threatened. And there's also it's like once you open the door, then you have to move. And I think that can be intimidating. People may want to, but they may not feel that they have the ability to within the structures of some of their spiritual groups that might not allow for that. And there's the sense of commitment that when you do open that door, you are now committed to doing something. And I think that can be intimidating.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, as a final question for the three of you, on a personal level, where are you finding your hope for the future of the planet? What sustains your efforts at EarthCare?
I'm not the most optimistic that you'll find. And I guess my biggest hope is that I really can't predict the future. I have to keep a sense of humility that I don't know where it's going to go. So while I don't have great confidence that we'll be able to stop the results of these things, this train that's either at the cliff or already over it, it may not be likely to succeed. I may not have much hope, but it's clear to me that there's a right way to live anyway, and I have to go that direction. It's kind of another version of I can't unsee it.
Well, when I am hopeful, I think it's really when I'm coming together in these kinds of groups and I'm seeing the work that's being done, and I'm seeing all of the inspiring advocacy and changes and ideas and policies that people are trying to push through, all that work. And the fact that we are coming together more, talking about it more, it's at the forefront of many more conversations than it was even just a couple of years ago. I do have hope that will it happen fast enough? I think that's where I get scared and I wonder, because I see us going in the right direction. I just don't know if we're going fast enough. But I think that the more we can come together and support each other, grieve together, work together, learn from each other, I think that we can keep that hope alive and keep going. And just maybe it's not too late.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Steve and Andrea in that I don't necessarily hold out a whole lot of hope, at least not within my lifetime. But that is irrelevant. I have an obligation to do the best that I can in the time that I've got with the resources that I've got, regardless of whether there's hope. Someday, maybe, I hope for the earth herself, and I hope for the future of my grandkids, which is not looking real good right now. But that doesn't mean I stop working.
We've been in conversation with members of the Multifaith Network for Climate Justice. To learn more about the organization or about the faith communities that each of our guests are part of, check out the show notes for this episode at circlewood.online. And while you're at it, you can register for the Earthkeepers live webcast with Brian McLaren on May 17th. If you appreciate this podcast and want to help us expand its global reach, please share this episode with a friend. You can also show your support by subscribing. Just go to whatever platform you listen to podcasts on and hit the subscribe or follow button for the Earthkeepers podcast. Finally, it would be very helpful if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. I'm Forrest Ginsley, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon. Our producer is Dave Ulfers. Forrest Reed is our editor and the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Rochelle Nordman, and Jesselyn Gentry is our social media director. Thank you, friends, for listening. And please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.